Alright, so I've had the nightmarish day of all, had to reinstall Windows today, so this video is coming out pretty late. But here is a video that you guys have asked me on my Discord to react to. Neil Druckmann gives up. No Last of Us Part 3 ever. WTF. Now, as you know, I'm a huge fan of the Last of Us games, so I'm eager to see what he's, gonna say about this. So without further ado, let's get started.
Hey there gamers, Dreamcast Guy here, and today we're talking about The Last of Us because this is by far one of the most beloved and sometimes most controversial PlayStation games of all time. Like a lot of people, I love the first game and I kind of hate the second game, but I've always been curious.
See, I'm not the same at all. I really enjoyed the first one, and I really enjoyed the second one. Now, I know for a lot of people, the second one was spoiled because Joel, came to his untimely end. But at the end of the day, a lot of that was spoiled because some idiot decided to leak it onto the internet that Joel pretty much exits the game really early on. And that wow factor, that shock factor, never really set into anyone. I think the game would have been perceived a lot more differently had that leak not happened. And this is why leakers, there's a special place in hell for you when it comes to that sort of leaking on a game that hasn't come out yet, that is a massive, massive spoiler. Anyway, continuing.
Curious about where else this world can go, these characters, these stories, this incredibly interesting infection, how else.
Well, Abby and I can't remember what that little girl's name was, but they actually make it to Firefly. So from that point on, I expect the next game either to be about Abby and the girl, or Neil Druckmann did actually say that it was going to be based on Tommy. And, seeing how he moved on after what everything happened. Because if you remember at the end of The Last of Us 2, when Ellie decides to give up the revenge, Tommy comes and says, no, you can't do that. You have to go after her. You have to get revenge for, and that's where it kind of escalates, where she goes and finally catches up with Abby. So it's going to be interesting, but there definitely was a way for it to go. But I guess you could also have just done it where that kind of stuff would have happened in the background, and you could have gone to other settlements and seen what they're doing and kind of run across the old crew and see what's happening there and how they're getting on with their lives. There's multiple ways this could have been done, and this is why factions would have been so important to the franchise, because factions was exactly that, looking at it from another settlement, and it could have really tied into part 3, but sadly it was never meant to be.
Else can it spread? But apparently Neil Druckmann, the creator of The Last of Us, the writer, the director, has just confirmed like 30 seconds ago there isn't going to be a Last of Us Part 3, and everybody's kind of instantly saying, what the heck? So let's take a look at some reactions, and I kind of want to talk through my thoughts as a person that really enjoys these games, for better or for worse, why I feel like abandoning it is such a stupid move. But let's get into it. Hi.
Now, I'm not going to agree with him, even though technically I do agree with him that it's a stupid move, but I'm not going to agree with him just for the sake of it. But there we go.
Hope you're having a great day, and if you could, please give this video a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Now, I want to begin with the quote itself because sometimes you see stuff and it's out of context. There's definitely quotes that sound bad, but in the grander scheme of it, they're not too bad. But in this case, the full quote is terrible. So he's currently doing a press tour. Neil Druckmann is doing interviews, talking production and stuff because they're about to show The Last of Us Season 2. Now, I think a lot of people that enjoyed the first season of the TV show, I kind of have a feeling that people are going to hate Season 2 of the show because of certain golf club related Pedro Pascal moments that are coming up. But, okay, so somebody...
Do you actually think they're going to take him out? Pedro Pascal, do you think they're going to actually remove him from the series? or are they going to change it? I mean, I'm hoping they stay true to the series, to the games, but considering how he was with the Mandalorian, where he forced them to allow him to take off the mask, it will be interesting to see if he does actually come to his untimely end. Because, Joel does exit quite painfully.
He said, specifically, what about the long whispered possibility of a Last of Us Part 3? I was waiting for this question, says Druckmann. Whenever people bring up the prospect of a third game, I guess the only thing I would say is don't bet on there being more of The Last of Us. Now, before anything else, this feels, honestly to me, I think Neil Druckmann is giving up. I think Neil Druckmann really tried to do something maybe too different with The Last of Us Part 2. I mean, murdering the main character that is so beloved. I mean, making a different character that feels so evil. So much obsessive darkness and despair. Not that the first game was...
But that was the whole point of the second game. The point of the first game was the bond between a father and a daughter. He loses his daughter pretty much at the start of the game, and he creates that bond with Ellie. And that's why he makes that ultimate sacrifice at the end of the first game. But in the second game, it's all about exploring pure darkness and revenge. That is literally the core theme of that game. So, I don't know. I actually really enjoyed it. I think the final area, when you got to that kind of resort, kind of felt out of place. But outside of that, I think the game was pretty good. I don't think there really was a need for that final area. I think that final area was literally just tacked on for the sake of it to pad out the game, and I just think honestly, I think that final area for me actually lost it a point. But outside of that, it was a very, very enjoyable game, regardless of, how the developments of the game went. There was some shocking moments in the second game, stuff that made you take a step back.
It's hopeful or anything like that, but there was levity. There was sparks of brightness in the first game that made The Last of Us feel like there was a need to live, a joy that people will find a way to laugh and smile. Whereas the second game is so just absolutely obsessively depressing. I almost feel like because of the blowback, because of the hatred, because of so many people in a lot of ways obsessively hating The Last of Us Part 2, I kind of think that he's afraid to go back to it. He's afraid, in my opinion, to finish the story.
And I think that's a really good point. I think he is concerned about the reception of the third game, especially if he has an idea of where to take it, if it's anything like the second game, or even remotely connected in some way, in terms of themes. I think he's worried that it could ruin the legacy that is The Last of Us. But at the same time, the story is not finished. People may say it's finished, but it is not. Part 2 ended on a cliffhanger, and the title screen changes to indicate that cliffhanger. So at the end of the day, leaving a story untold, unfinished, is, in my opinion, just bad form. I don't even care if they release a DLC for the second game to wrap things up. I'm even happy with that. A 5-6 hour DLC just to wrap up the story, but don't just leave it on a cliffhanger for it never to be revisited or finished. I think that's just bad form, and I really don't like it when studios do that.
Now, there were talks a couple years back that Neil Druckmann wanted a happy ending, that he wanted to go to this world and most likely find a cure or try and do something besides just leaving this at the darkest, bleakest point of an already very, 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 very messed up world. But I want to take a look at the quotes here. People are saying, that would suck. There's so much more here. So this is Dom the Bomb. Dom the Bomb actually is a Last of Us YouTuber. I follow him. Very, very nice guy. And essentially he's like, well, there was this quote from a couple of years back. There's probably one more chapter to the story. Neil, how could you do this to me? Damn, Neil, out of ideas for the conclusion. Now, can I be honest? I almost feel like this is such an interesting point. Conclusion. I feel like The world of The Last of Us feels very unfinished. Whether you love it, whether you hate it, whether you feel like the characters had some sort of...
And this is where factions could have come in and filled up that gap. It could have, I mean, as you can see here, part 1 sold 30 million copies. That's insane, by the way. That's a lot of copies. And then part 2 only sold 10 million because of the whole Joel thing and how people got upset about it. And so people decided to rebel against it. But a factions type game, a live service one, could have actually filled in the gaps story-wise of where Druckmann wanted to go, and also just funded the third game. If it's a successful live service game, you're making bank. I will keep on badgering on about this because I'm disappointed that Factions 2 was cancelled because I was highly looking forward to that. And I'm now even more disappointed that The Last of Us 3 may never come to be. I'm a huge fan of the series, and, you know, it just feels really crappy that this is basically where we've got to.
Character arc or something like that. It always felt like they were leading up to something. It always felt like, hey, if the whole point is about people being immune or people actually able to resist the virus, it did always feel like the point of The Last of Us is that at some point, somebody's going to actually figure out how to beat this, right? To make it not just this tiny, shallow puddle of very, very hungry humans. How can we make a comeback? I think the idea of a conclusion...
But they kind of did, right? Ellie was the cure and so was Abby. And the doc clearly didn't want to sacrifice his daughter, so instead they chose to sacrifice Ellie, and Joel just wasn't willing to sacrifice Ellie, even though Ellie was willing to make that sacrifice for the betterment of mankind. But, yeah.
Is a great way to put it. It does feel like there was supposed to be more to this story. Part 1 sold 30 million copies. Part 2 sold 10 million copies. Part 2 also cost about $300 million to make in 2020. I actually think all these numbers are very wrong. I think they said Part 2 sold closer to 15 million. And I think the budget of both the games combined was like 100 million. But even if those numbers are wrong,
Do you know what? 15 million, 10 million, I don't think it really matters. They got it in the right ballpark.
I do think it's a good sign about the fact that it does seem like Naughty Dog is just not as, financially invested into storyboarding and figure this out. I think that it is also one of those things where obviously we had the recently canceled Last of Us Online game. Now, from all the reports directly from PlayStation, they said that they were making this big budget games as a service living world version of The Last of Us with daily quests and open exploration and characters and stuff like that. And Naughty Dog themselves said, okay, we don't want to do this because we're going to have to do it forever. If we start this project, it's going to be all hands on deck on this and only this for pretty much the rest of the existence of the studio.
Or they could just hire more people to do that job while the main team works on the next game, the next Last of Us. I mean, if it's a successful studio, why not? If it's bringing in money, why not? Why not expand and build upon the franchise that people love? I don't get it. Like, I keep hearing this, and it irritates me because if the studio is... I mean, everyone refers to Naughty Dog as one of the greatest studios of all time, and yet they can't figure out how to run two teams. One as a live service and one as the main team. They can't figure that out. Come on.
We'd rather cancel this and work games like, what is their new game? Heretic Prophecy Intergalactic, or, there's talks about a new IP coming up from them. It does seem like maybe the canceling of The Last of Us Online kind of doused their spirit for this world, where they probably said, all right, here's a lot of ideas and characters and conundrums, and screw it. Screw this world. We can't do it. We'll come back in 10 years or something like that when we're really, really desperate. How to ruin a franchise.
And that's it, right? And this is what I've been saying. He said it right there, right? He said it right there. Now, a lot of people have been arguing to me about this, and he said it right there. Subconsciously, he probably didn't even realize what he just said. But the fact is, Sony just isn't hungry anymore. And that's the point. Because if they were out for the kill, if they were out to destroy Xbox like they were towards the end of the PS3, during the PS4 era, that was their sole objective. You can guarantee your bottom dollar that you'd see an Uncharted in development and The Last of Us 3. But they're just not hungry anymore. Because now they can be complacent. They can afford to release one game a year or maybe 0 games for 1 year. It doesn't matter because they've got games now coming from all over the place. Whether it's from Xbox, it's from Activision Blizzard, from ZeniMax, it don't matter because those games are eventually coming. And I think that's probably if I was a pro PlayStation fan, I mean, I am I do like my PlayStation. I like my games, as you can see from my reaction here. But if I was, the actual influencers like the Poeta Rocks and stuff like that, I would be, calling out to Sony and saying, why? Why are we not having the same kind of aggressive Sony that we had before? Why are we all going complacent right now? And this is what I was saying when I said, this is the point I was making. Like, at the end of the day, without competition there to drive Microsoft, to drive Sony, they will just do stuff in their own time. And as he said, when they get desperate, there's no competition, so they're never going to get to that point anymore. They just don't care. They can afford to, just doss around in new IPs and try different things and see how it goes, because it's not like anyone's going to come in and take that number 1 spot away from them now, is it? Nintendo doesn't count, so who else is left? And I think I'm happy he said it, even though he probably didn't realize it, but that's been the point I've been making all along.
It's hard to ruin a franchise worse than The Last of Us Part 2 did. I'd rather they continue to focus on new IP. The Last of Us Part 2 is the equivalent of Season 6 through Season 8 of Game of Thrones.
I disagree.
My God. It doesn't need to continue. Do new things. Tired of hearing about it nonstop for 12 years. I loved the first game, but it's enough.
I disagree.
Don't blame him. Too much toxicity. I honestly think this is the real crux of it. They even talk about it in this interview about the fact that the leaked cutscenes that happened with The Last of Us Part 2.
There you go.
So much stuff. It does seem like for all...
And, this whole scene where Joel, and his life was ended, that was supposed to be like a big moment in the game. But some twat decided to go along and post pretty much the biggest spoiler in gaming for a while on social media with actual video evidence. It was probably one of the most horrible things you could do to a gamer. And instead of it actually having that kind of big impact, like the shock value that it was supposed to give, people already knew it was coming. So it was a case of, oh my God, they're killing Joel. Why are you doing this? He's like an awesome character. He is. And so the narrative changed from you wanting to go out and get revenge, which is what the game was based on, to Neil Druckmann, why you do this? All because of one twat.
All the hate The Last of Us Part 2 gets, I'm definitely in the camp that I think The Last of Us Part 2 is a bad game writing-wise. I think it's amazing graphically, combat. I mean, it's seriously one of the best PlayStation 4 games that we ever got. My thing is that I feel like this world, leaving it on that final scene of Abby just sitting in the water, or Ellie sitting in the water watching Abby go away. I don't know, man. This feels like a terrible, 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 terrible final scene of the...
I guess he didn't really notice that the title screen changed. I mean, for someone who, confesses that they love The Last of Us, and for someone who actually confesses that they're a massive PlayStation fanboy, well, the fact that you missed that detail, the title screen changes, and it's indicative that Abby and the little girl actually make it to the Fireflies headquarters, that's a bit disappointing. That is kind of disappointing. I thought at least he would have got that bit.
Entire thing. I want more The Last of Us games. Don't just turn it into a comic book. Don't just, I don't know, start
I agree.
taking the scripts you've already written for a Last of Us Part 3 game and turn it into a Last of Us Part 3 seasons 4, 5, 6. Don't just take this world and turn it into a TV show. Keep it, make it playable, make it good. But these have just been some off-the-cuff thoughts. How do you feel about The Last of Us Part 2, Part 3, and now, I guess, the non-existent Part 3?
Well, to me, as I said, I think I can see he's very conflicted in this video. And I can see that, quite honestly, he wants a part 3, even though he wasn't a fan of part 2, only because Joel, met his end. But I still believe that had those leaks not happened, part 2 would have been kind of received a lot differently. That impact that people would have experienced would have been so different. But, as he says, not to parrot what he's saying, I would love to see more The Last of Us games, but I also think after the reception of the second game, Druckmann just doesn't want to sour the legacy of the franchise. It'll be interesting to see how successful the season 2 and 3 of the show is, because the next 2 seasons is supposed to tell the story of the second game. And if it's really successful, are they going to continue the story going forward? And will that be The Last of Us Part 3 in live action form? That's the key part here. But anyway, folks, that's the video. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. If you've enjoyed this reaction, hit that like button, subscribe, hit that bell to stay up to date with all content I release. You can support me additionally through super thanks underneath the video. Of course, just hitting that like and subscribe is a free way to support me. But if you want to support me even further and you want to become a YouTube member, the join button is right there, where you can get content like this earlier than anyone else. Right? Until the next one, thanks so much for watching.